Good morning, everybody. How are you doing? Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me there in the back? Wonderful. Good. Thank you so much for having me here. This is a great honor and pleasure to be here for many reasons. And as you heard, I come from Finland. I came from Helsinki yesterday. But I have to reveal a secret to you that if you read carefully my bio, the first sentence says that I'm a professor of education policy now at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. This is my first day in office today, so I'm starting here, which is great. I try to do my best. So I'm going to give you I try to give you a kind of a big picture of education, including some insights of the Finnish thing, and a couple of notions. One is that when I say education, I refer to normally to K to 12 education. So higher education is not included in this discourse that I do because it's a completely different world. The second thing that I hope that everybody keeps in mind is that there's a world of difference to talk about education systems, the whole systems, than talk about individual schools. So building a great school is a no-brainer. There are a lot of great schools in all of your countries, including here in Singapore. But it's a very different thing to build the system of education where all the schools are good schools and all the children are learning well. And so I'm looking at this other one because that's a thing that we all share. We all of our countries, regardless of where you come from, have a kind of a commitment to educate everybody. I don't know any education system where the commitment would include only some of the children, although in practice that's the case often. So I speak about that, but let me ask you a couple of questions. Raise your hand if you are from Singapore, just to make a kind of an idea of where you come from. How many of you come from India? About half. How many Europeans do we have here? Okay. From Americas? Is anybody from the moon? There's somebody who feels like I'm from the moon. Wonderful, very good. Now, raise your hand if you enjoy watching sports. Almost everybody, okay. Raise your hand if you think you're good in mathematics. Almost everybody, okay. Now, listen. One of those things that we do all over the world to our children now is that we test them often, right? Okay? If you ask kids whether they like it, most kids say that I really don't like those things. But I want, because this looks like a classroom, so I want to begin by making a little test. I want to actually test how smart you really are. And that will basically determine the rest of the conference for you. And this test is a very simple, like most of the educational assessments that we have in our schools are very simple things. So only thing you need to do is to shout out the number that you're going to see in the screen in a moment. Shout it out as if you were in a sports event, whether it's a cricket or football or ice hockey, whatever it is, okay? Loudly, yeah? Nobody's going to come and punish us if we make some noise here, all right? So when you see another number appearing there, the only thing you need to do is to add that number to what you previously said, all right? Now it gets complicated. When you see the third number appearing there, what you do is just add that number to the previous sum, okay? And in about 10:30, we should be done. Okay, are you with me? Okay, are you ready? No, what I want to have here is really a loud noise, just like you were watching your favorite sport and your team is just a little bit behind the visitor, and it's up to you whether your team is going to win or not. Okay, let's see. 1, 2, 3, now. No, people. Let's go. I mean loudly. Okay? You can do much better than that, right? Give me some noise. 1, 2, 3, let's go. Now. All right. I'll give you a moment. You can take your smartphones and do the mathematics if you want. So here comes the honest question. Raise your hand if you said 5,000. Look around, people. Just look around. If you feel ashamed, look around. That most of you said 5,000. There's some smart people here, so congratulations. So what's going on here? Why do we make a mistake with the simple thing that in most countries, including here, probably the third or fourth graders almost always get right?
You hijacked our minds with screaming, adding 1,000 every 2 steps.
Hijacking your minds, it's a good try. But this is still mathematics, right? What's that? You know, most people here say that, of course, we make a mistake if we just keep on going, we don't stop and think. In the end of the day, we make a mistake, even with the simple things. We just go with the flow. Sometimes I hear people saying that, I was supposed to say 4,100, but then I heard this voice around me. My colleague was saying just 5, and I changed my mind. I said, that must be 5,000 because somebody was saying 5,000, okay? And I made a mistake. Okay. So, of course, my point here is not to test your mathematics. I know that all of you could pass the test and you can easily do this. But my point here is that when we talk about education, particularly education systems, and how to make them better, how to fix or improve them, we're talking about extremely complex things, much more complicated than arithmetics. And what we do often, particularly these days, that we try to reform and change the education systems exactly as we did here. That we don't stop and think, and we just kind of hear the noise and voices around us, and then we move on. And then we realize that in the end of the month or year or project or reform, we have made a mistake. So I think one thing that Finland was really good at was that we never went into this type of trap. And we didn't know that, but that was a kind of a part of our culture and nature. That we wanted to always ask questions like, is this really going to be good for kids? Is this really going to take us where we want to go? And oftentimes we had to kind of explain to ourselves that why all the others are going exactly the other way when we think that this is the direction what we should do. And there are some other countries, other places where this has taken place, but that's my kind of opening here. Now, let me speak a little bit about this whole thing, if I can get this thing working. No, I have to go here. Now, let's think for a moment that this is year 2000. I guess the INSEAD, you started here in year 2000, right, in Singapore? Right? Okay, so let's assume for a moment that this is the inaugural seminar of this great business school here in Singapore. And you are all here in year 2000. And there's a question from the floor that where would you look at if you were to try to look for inspiration and good ideas for improving, developing your own system of education, not schools, individual schools, but the systems. Where would you look at year 2000 around the world if you were here thinking about this question? Give me one place that would be kind of a potential source, one country that would be a potential source of inspiration and ideas 18 years ago. United States, England, right? I don't know why this is not working. I have to stand here. So, these are some of the countries that people often had in mind. Okay? England and United States, France, Australia, Sweden, Japan, Germany, and so on. So what's my point here is that, year 2000, if this was a conference about education like this one here, many of you would also know that this year, the OECD, that everybody knows the OECD, right? The OECD, for the first time, will collect information about its member countries regarding what the 15-year-olds in the school system can do in reading, math, and science. So this was a thing called PISA, right? Not to be confused with Pasi, that is my name. Sometimes in conferences like this, people introduce me as a PISA Sahlberg. So thanks for not doing that. Okay, so this was a thing that was coming in the year 2000. So many of you would know when you go and have a coffee, you would talk about, how your own country would do in this new test that had never been done before, or who could be possibly the winners of that new assessment. And when the results came for the first time public in year 2001, so we're talking about December 2001, this is what the world saw. Okay, so this is the first time ever when the OECD released the so-called PISA survey results. And you can see that there's Finland, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, and South Korea on the top. And this was quite surprising for many. People were saying that, so what's going on? Where are all those countries we thought that are doing well? And some of them are, let's look at the United States, France, Norway, Switzerland, Germany. They were not really anywhere near the top of this chart. You know what was a kind of a source for happiness in Finland was that Sweden was number 9. Because for us, in my country, this was a huge surprise, kind of a shock, because nobody kind of knew why this happened. I was working at the University of Helsinki at that time. I remember that morning when these results came out, and my phone started to ring, and my colleagues from the ministry and university started to call me and said, how do we explain this now? And I had no idea. And we were all university professors. We were doing research on this. So we had no idea how on earth Finland can be on the top of this new league table of the OECD. So you know what our strategy was, the explanation? So we had several meetings, and after a couple of months of consideration of this response to this question, what has happened, was that maybe OECD made a mistake. We cannot be that good. So rather than traveling around the world and making a big issue out of how good Finland is in education, we decided to be silent and say that let's wait, because we knew that 3 years later the OECD will come back again with another study, and maybe that time it also comes with a public announcement to everybody that we are very sorry for making a mistake with Finland, because actually Finland is just like all the other Nordic countries that you see over there. So we were silent and said that let's hope that there will be not too much embarrassment there 3 years later. So this was the year 2003. So now we are looking at the December 2004, and this was a mathematics PISA. Finland, South Korea, Netherlands, Japan, Canada, Belgium, and so on. So again, many people in Finland, about half of our educator community said that maybe the OECD made the same mistake twice. Maybe they haven't realized yet that there's something, rather than using the inches when they're measuring the length, they're using centimeters or something like this. Seriously, this is how people thought. So we said that let's see what happens 3 years later. And still we didn't make too much noise around the world. 3 years later, in 2006, when there was a science study, again, you see that there's Finland, Canada, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Netherlands, and so on. And it was only then, in 2008 or so, when my country and people there kind of accepted, okay, we have done something differently, and there's a kind of a reason to take a closer look what could explain, how can we make sense out of this thing that Finland has been consistently doing well in PISA. And the kind of a more important question that came out around 2007, 2008, after this third cycle of the OECD PISA, this was not so much about Finland, because the importance of this first 6-7 years of this survey, this new era of international measurement, was because of two questions. One is that how can we explain the good performance in education looking at this data, this evidence? Is there any way that we could identify similar things that these high-performing or well-performing education systems have done? Do they run their systems with the same policies, the same principles and ideas? Or are they simply so different from one another that we cannot say anything about kind of a common factors? And then, of course, the other question, equally important, is that what the heck is going on in those countries that have been kind of making public the fact that they are among the best in the world, and they are not, like England or the United States or France or Germany or Australia, many other places that have not been really able to get there. So these two questions have been really, really important for the work of the researchers and analysts and politicians and policymakers around the world. Why some systems are doing well and what's wrong with the others. Very important, because we didn't know really that in year 2000. In this conference here in 2000, we would only have a kind of a speculations about what works at the level of the education system. But now we started to kind of get to the point where we can look at the data, we can look at the evidence, whatever you think about this evidence, but at least there was some type of global international evidence. Are you with me? Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of things now about these two questions. The first one, and this has been a big part of my own research during the last 10 years around the world, and not only mine, but my colleagues around the world, really, including here in Singapore. There are some prominent scholars here doing research about these issues as well. The first question, really, the interesting question is that, so what are those, can we kind of identify the failed education policy drivers? When I use the term policy driver, I mean a kind of a priority principle in education policy or education reform that some education systems have established or believe that this is a good way to run the improvement. Okay? So we are looking for we have been trying to identify what those countries have done that have not been really successful. We call them often wrong drivers in education or failed education policies or so. So there are I'm going to show you these 4 things over there that are common in most of those education systems where they have had trouble in getting better. And remember, I'm talking about the system now. I'm looking at the whole system of education. Competition. All of those education systems where they have found difficulties to get better, the thinking is more or less based on the idea that competition is the best way to enhance the performance of education system. In other words, apply the market principles within education systems. Insist that the schools and teachers and students have to compete against one another so that they do better and improve. Okay? So this has been a very, very common thing around the world in all of those countries. Then the other one is the idea of standardization. People often say that the problem is with this lack of standards. That if we have clearer standards and higher standards for everybody within the school system, things would improve. And all of those countries that have done that have never been able to improve. I'm not saying that this is only because of this standardization thing, but it's part of this problem, part of this issue there. Then the third one is that many countries in this category have said that we have to open the teaching profession and school leadership profession to anybody who wants to do that. Anybody who has credentials to teach or lead should have an opportunity to work in a school, even if you're not the teacher. Okay? So this has happened, and this is happening in many countries now, often also because there's becoming a huge shortage of qualified teachers. But that's something that is common there. And then finally, the test-based accountability, the idea that we have to hold schools and teachers accountable. And how do we hold them accountable is that we need to have information and data of their performance. So we use standardized tests and assessments, and then use this information for the accountability purposes. And often in many countries, like in America, for example, you have seen these punitive or consequential accountability policies where schools are punished or individuals are punished if they are not delivering. Okay? So these are some of those. These are not the only ones. There are some other things in these systems that have not been successful in improving. And I often call these, let me put this one here, the examples are England, not UK, but England, United States, Australia, and Chile. And the kind of the logic of this type of reform is to educate consumers. This, I think, is for this conference, this is a very important notion. That the idea, the kind of a mindset, the dean was speaking about the mindset of the school. How do we prepare young people? The mindset is a kind of a consumer mindset in many of these education systems. They are consumers of labor markets, or they're consumers of higher education markets, or they're consumers of whatever. But the mindset of graduates, those who graduate from these education systems, is a kind of a consumer mindset. Okay? And you will see the difference now when we look at the other side, those education systems that have been doing differently. Are you still with me? Are you awake? Okay. So now let me show you this, because this is a kind of an interesting experiment done in the Netherlands. Just a half-a-minute thing, but I often hear, like I think the next panel here is also introduce with this question that now when we talk about millennials, those people who have born in the era of technology and all those things, that they are somehow different learners. Of course, they're different learners, and that's what I accept. But I have difficulties in accepting that these millennials would be superior learners compared to my generation when it comes to communication or problem solving or whatever it is. And just to make my point clear, look at this. This is a little simple experiment there. This is a white room. In the middle of the white room, there's a table. And in the middle of the table, you will see probably there's a kind of a 30 centimeter tall tube, glass or plastic tube. And in the middle of the tube, there's a peanut. Okay? So the problem is to get that peanut out of the tube. Okay? I'm going to show you what some of the millennials do, and actually some of the adults as well. And if it was true that they are superior creative problem solvers, they would probably figure this out in a minute. Okay, take a look. Not very promising for. Anyway, the point of this little thing here is that we need to be careful when we put any assumptions about what people can or cannot do. What I have seen in my own country and around the world really is that people in the universities and colleges, they're actually saying that these kids know less and less, that they have less and less these competencies and skills that would be really critical for being successful in the university. I've been teaching in the university for many years, and I can say that we have issues now with those young people who spend too much time with all sorts of other things than thinking and learning and having conversations. But that's another story. We can talk about that in a panel. So now this is the second one. The equally important question is that, so what are those education systems doing that have been able to be successful? Like Singapore. Singapore is one of those examples here. Let me show you those 4 things, and you will quickly see that the successful education system policies are almost the opposite of what you saw before, right? So it's not about competition, and this is very much what Finland has done over the last 30 years. Education is a collaborative, it's a collective, cooperative thing. It's about sharing and networking, helping one another, rather than competing, insisting that schools compete against one another. And it's about education policies and reforms to design them in a way that will encourage schools and people to do that. Okay? And it's the same thing in all the other countries, including here. Singapore is a good example of how this country has been trying to help schools through clusters in this city or country here to work together rather than work against one another. Risk-taking and creativity rather than standardization. In Finland, we often say that the worst enemy of creativity and innovation is standardization in schooling. So you need to have education policies and a system of education that encourages everybody to take risks. Think about it. How many education systems you know where the minister would say, or the school principal would say that, tell me more about your mistakes. Don't report about your success and wonderful stories that you have been able to accomplish. Tell me about what you tried to do hard, but you failed. What did you learn out of this? Very few countries. I know some, but most education systems have been designed exactly the other way. If you make a mistake, if you fail, you'll lose your job, or lose your money and students and all those other things. Professionalism is a very common thing for all of those high-performing education systems, like Finland and Singapore. That we do not allow anybody else to enter the classroom but those who have proper credentials to do that. Okay? And it's the same thing, particularly here in Singapore. Same thing with the school leadership. In order to lead the school, you have to be a qualified teacher, experienced teacher, and leader to do that. Okay? And then the trust-based accountability rather than test-based trust-based responsibility rather than test-based accountability. It's a completely different thing. We deliberately have designed school system so that we can trust teachers and schools what they do, that we can basically delegate the most complex things to be decided at the level of the school, like the curriculum. You know, how to figure out the complex, wicked problems in education. No minister or the minister's team is able to figure out these solutions in their own cabinets. That has to be done by the experts in the school. So it's a completely different world. So some of those good examples are Canada. If you really want to see a world-class education things, go to Canada. Take a look at Singapore, Estonia, Japan, or Finland. And there are some others, but those are the according to the OECD, the high-performing systems of education. And if you look at this, you know, the mindset of this education system is to prepare, educate creators, innovators, those people who can create, not just consume, but create new things. And you mentioned the Angry Birds and Nokia and those things. These are just the kind of visible things out of this creator mindset in our education system in Finland. And same in Canada and the other places. So I hope that this makes sense to you, because, you know, what if you are an education system designer now, if you're looking at the education system, this is what you're facing right now in the world. You have this kind of a movement of what I call a global educational reform movement over there that is mostly built on failed assumptions about what works at the level of the education, as we know now. We don't know everything, but we know pretty much. And then you have this other choice, kind of an alternative thing. I call it the Finnish way. It's not really, if you don't like Finland, you can call it the Canadian way or the fourth way or whatever, you just call it a different way, alternative way. But it's a very different thing. And so now the question is that how can we help the policymakers and politicians and those who are in charge to understand the evidence, understand what the research and data is telling us? And what does it mean in your own education systems? Nobody should ever try to copy Finland or Singapore or any other country. That doesn't work. But you can learn a lot about, you know, how to make these things work in a different way. So that's the kind of a critical thing. So let me close here by leaving you three things, three keys for the future that I think is critical. And I hope that this will be kind of a part of the conversation also here today and tomorrow. The first one is the idea of equity. You know, you people are thinking about investing in education, putting money or resources or thinking your time in improving education. You know, the best bet, if you are interested in improving the system of education, is to invest in equity. And equity here means that what kids learn in school is not primarily determined by where they come from, right? So, in other words, that everybody, all the children should have opportunity to be successful. It requires a completely different type of thinking than just designing a school system that is good for some of the kids, okay? And as many of you are investors, I'm not, but I learned in school that if you want to have a return, you have to invest something. Am I right? There will never be a return if you don't invest anything. So, you know, if you want to get something out of the system, you have to invest there. And so where to invest your resources or funds is equity. It's not everything, but it's a good target. Let me show you why this makes sense. Because, again, the OECD data, and this is the kind of evidence that we have, allows us to ask this question that is there any correlation or association between the learning outcomes, the quality of student achievement, what kids learn in the school system, and how equitable the system is. Okay, are you with me? And here, so we are looking at these two variables here. Equity is here, so when you move from left to right, the equity increases. In other words, the relationship between the family background and student learning in school becomes weaker. So if your country is somewhere here, it means that you have more equity and more kids from different backgrounds have opportunity to be successful. If your country is somewhere here, it means that you have less equity, and basically you can determine the child's prospect in education by asking, where do you come from? What do your parents do? How much money do you have home? Or what's your mother's education? Okay? And then, of course, the student outcome, I'm using the PISA, kind of an aggregate of PISA. The student achievement is over there. So let me show you some of these countries over here. This is the United States. So to all American sisters and brothers here in the room, America, according to this, is kind of average. Just like UK, Australia, New Zealand. So if you only speak one language in your country, you're average. So the good idea, good conclusion from this part of the data is to say that teach them another language like they do here in Singapore, or Finland, or some other places. Okay? Do we have any Canadians in the room here? Anybody from Canada? Good. Is there anybody who would like to be a Canadian? Most Americans do nowadays. Anyway, this is a good day to be a Canadian because look at Canada. Okay? So Canada is one of those education systems that you saw before that is really doing well in this international comparison. So good job, all Canadians. Yeah? When I go to Canada, I often hear people saying that the world needs more Canada. When I go to America, I hear the same thing. Okay, so Canada is so good that it's Canada is an educational heaven. This white cloud is their heaven because that's where the equity and quality or excellence meet. And this is a new thing. We didn't think like this 15 years ago. Most people were in this room 15 years ago, people would be saying that, no, you can just have one of those things. So which one do you want? Do you want to have excellence? So some really bright kids coming from the school system, and then we sacrifice the 20 or 30%, those who are failing, who will never learn anyway? Or would you have a school system where basically we work harder so that everybody would learn better? Now it's not anymore the question of either or. Now it's, if you look at the policies in these countries, in the heaven, they are designed in a very different way. So the other countries are Finland, Estonia, and Japan, according to the latest OECD data. So there are 4 heavenly education systems right now. And here are the others. So you will see that, the interesting thing, these are only the OECD countries over there. Interesting thing is that these flags are not all over the place, but they are kind of scattered around the regression or correlation line. I'm not using the line, but it's more like a kind of stairway to heaven, right? Remember this song?
There's a lady who's sure all it glitters is gold, and she's buying the stairway.
So if you're here, one of those countries over there, that's where you are in trouble, because you have a trouble with equity and quality or excellence there. So that's where the really hard way is to go and climb up the stairway to go all the way to heaven. South Korea used to be in the heaven, but they're kind of slipping down now, according to this data. So equity, that's why equity is a good pick. If you want to think about the system of education, think hard about equity. Equity is a very complex thing to turn into operations, or what does it mean in practice? I'm not going to talk about that. If somebody's interested in that, I'm happy to speak about that later. So Singapore is over there, China and Hong Kong, and you see that these Southeast Asian education tigers are very different in terms of the equity. They're all performing very high in the academic results, but the equity is an issue. Just like here in Singapore, it's a no secret here that the equity is a challenge in this country. And Singapore is trying to do a lot. For example, introducing early childhood education particularly for those who cannot afford otherwise to do that. So that's a big thing. Then the second one is the play. I don't know if this is a surprise to you, but my second recommendation for you is to let the children play. Play is becoming more and more important, particularly if you are interested in educating entrepreneurs or business people. It's all about, business is play, right? You have to have a mindset of, trying things and playing with your imagination and, having empathy and all those things that you need. And I'm saying this because when I travel around the world, what I see is that there's less and less time for children to play in school and outside of the school. Partly because kids are spending more time with the homework and school things today than ever before. And secondly, because they have all kinds of other things that they do but play. And by play, I mean that kind of a free play outdoors. Climb the tree and fall down and, do all those things. Try to figure out what to do. Many parents, particularly in the United States, are very much afraid of the kids getting bored, that they don't have anything to do. And that's a huge mistake, because the boredom is often a kind of a start of the great ideas, great things. When kids have to sit down home and say that, so what should I do next? There's nothing to do here. Go figure. That's when the play kind of sparks out. I'm going to play you again a half-a-minute thing from my friend, very good friend from Harvard Medical School, called Michael Rich. And Michael is one of those champions of play, and he spends his life now and time and money to research and advocate play for everybody, basically. But listen to what he has to say in a very short thing, that why we should be more serious and consider free play for children. This is Michael Rich.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Rich, the pediatrician and director of the Center on Media and Child Health at Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. In today's busy world, it's hard for parents to know how their children should spend their free time. Should they be taking extra classes or playing more sports? Or can they be allowed to direct their own play or even to daydream? 88% of parents think their kids are pressured to grow up too quickly and are overscheduled. Yet many of them still have them take extra classes or sports because they're afraid that they'll fall behind in some way, that they won't be able to compete in the fast-paced world of today. But the reality is that play is absolutely essential for kids to grow up smart, healthy, happy, and capable of handling the social demands of everyday life. Make time for your child to play, particularly free play, in which she or he is able to make decisions about where they go, what they do, what they're doing with their time. Because when children lead play, they build empathy, they figure out how to resolve conflict, and they learn how to negotiate all of the variables of daily life. More play today leads to a healthier, happier, more successful tomorrow.
Sounds familiar? Yeah, exactly. So if you have a chance to influence in any school system, education system, or school, consider, figuring out how to have more time for children to play, because that's what's going to be good for everybody in the future. And then finally, this is my last thing here is to reimagining the teaching profession. And this is something that, again, you have a lot of power in your hands to influence in different ways. And we have to be careful in, the way we think about these things. I'm going to show you how this system looks like here in Singapore, and how the kind of the teaching profession thing, the scheme looks. What does it look like in Finland and Canada? All those successful systems. They are, it's more complicated actually than people think in the beginning, because these 4 elements, they are absolutely critical when it comes to thinking and preparing teachers in my country, for example. 4 things. First is that we insist, and we have decided already long ago, 30, 40 years ago, that the teaching profession must be based on academic degree. So everybody, all the teachers in Finland must have at least master's degree when they teach. Many of the primary school principals and others, they have a doctorate to work in a doctorate in education, not in any other field. So that's the kind of a starting point to make the teaching profession attractive for young people. And that's a key now in England and America and many other places, that young people are not interested in teaching. Of course, they are not interested in teaching if their degree that they need are required is not competitive to the other fields like medicine or law or business or other places. Then it has to be a research-based degree, not just like a professional master's degree like some countries are offering. It has to be competitive, based on research, so that those primary school teachers, even kindergarten teachers, when they graduate, that they would have a kind of a researcher mindset, that they observe and try to understand their classroom using research and academic deeper knowledge. Then the clinical practice should be part of the teacher preparation and teaching as well, meaning just like in the medicine, that how medical doctors learn their profession is that they go beside the bed, and that's where they practice and learn with the teachers and those who have experience. The teaching is exactly the same thing, that you need to have somebody there when you do your first classes and you get feedback and kind of a clinically learn how to teach, how to teach and help children and other people. And then the profession should be based on collaborative professionalism, not just isolation and individual thing, but something that would create a kind of an ethos of teaching being a collaborative profession. My last thing here comes from one of my favorite film figures. Anybody recognizes who this guy is? This is Sir Ridley Scott, and he gave, I don't know if you heard this last week when he was inducted to the BAFTA Fellowship in England. That is like a high-level, top-level film academy in the UK. He gave this speech. If you haven't heard this, go and look. It's an 8-minute acceptance speech. And what Ridley Scott does, he could have spoken about many things. He spent 8 minutes to talk about teachers and teaching and education. So I have this half-a-minute thing for you to close with, what Ridley Scott said last week in London about his own life and how education has shaped and influenced what he has been able to do. Take a look.
It's weirdly dressed students expressing their individualism, passionate teachers who are genuinely interested in the students, not just tolerating, but actually engaging with them, a world apart from my schooling till then. It's extraordinary what an enthusiastic teacher can do, drawing the student out, igniting independence, and encouraging the design of your own future, rather than waiting for something to happen. Teaching is the most important of all professions. Sort that out, and social problems will get sorted out.
Thank you. Have a great conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pasi. All right, so like a well-run Finnish school, we've given you 3 inspiring lecturers since the early morning. And like a great school, it's now time for you to have a recess. So go out, play, gossip with your old friends, make some new ones. And even though we don't have a school bell, please be back by 11. Thank you.